and welcome to Smarter, Richer, Braver, the podcast that's specially curated for you, a generation of young people who want to step up, stand out, and live life on their own terms. A generation who aim to do better, not just for themselves, but for humanity as a whole. A generation who aim to be smarter, richer, and braver, because that's exactly what the world today needs. I'm your host, Marilyn Pinto, author and founder at KFI Global, and I'd like to warmly welcome all you Gen Zers. A special shout out to all our KFI Global students listening in. Please know that this podcast was made with you in mind, and I promise it's going to be worth your attention.
This podcast is strictly for those 25 years and younger. If you are older than that, please listen at your own risk. Common side effects include regret and anger for not having heard this earlier in your life.
Have you ever been in a situation where you're in class and your professor suddenly calls on you to present? Or you're in a meeting and your boss asks you for feedback on the new project plan. Without any prior warning or preparation, you're asked to say a few words. Of course you have, because these kinds of situations are very common and an integral part of our lives. Now, as scary as formal speech giving is, spontaneous speaking is downright terrifying, and most of us respond accordingly by freezing up with stomach-churning anxiety and wishing the earth would just swallow us whole. But what if we could change that? What if we were given some insights and strategies to help you feel more comfortable and confident in approaching any in-the-moment speaking situations? Our guest today is Matt Abrahams. Matt is a professor at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business, where he teaches strategic communication. His online talks garner millions of views, and he hosts the popular award-winning podcast, Think Fast, Talk Smart. He's also written a new book titled Think Faster, Talk Smarter: How to Speak Successfully When You're Put on the Spot. We'll put the links to the podcast and the book in the show notes. Matt's going to guide you through speaking effectively in spontaneous and stressful situations. His advice, tactics, and insights will help you feel good and confident about communicating on the fly and guide you to leading a life that's smarter, richer, and braver. Welcome to the podcast, Matt, and thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely delighted to be here with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Matt, Gen Z are a paradox, right? I mean, they might be the first generation to excel and falter in the realm of communication, because while they are tech savvy and excel at communicating on social media with emojis and instant messaging, they seem to have a much harder time with face-to-face or verbal interactions. Why do you think it's vitally important for young people today to master the skill of speaking effectively in spontaneous and stressful situations?
Well, it boils down to the fact that most of how we get things done is communication-based, and it's critical to be able to connect with people, to understand their needs, to be able to tailor your messages to those needs. Younger people have a harder time with this for many reasons, one of which is technology. Technology is very absorbing, and in some ways takes away the burden of having to pay attention to nuanced detail and be able to respond quickly to it.
Is there one myth that most people harbor about spontaneous communication?
There are a few myths, but one that's huge is this idea that I just can't do it or I'm not good at it. I wasn't born with the gift of gab, and therefore it's challenging. In fact, all of us can learn to be better communicators, period, but specifically spontaneous communicators. We can work at it just like we work at developing any skill. I've seen this happen in my own life. I've seen it happen in the students I teach, as well as the people I coach. You can get better. You just have to take the time to work on it.
Could you talk us through some of the challenges that increase the pressure in spontaneous communication situations?
Certainly. A lot of it has to do with mindset and anxiety. Most people get nervous in high stakes speaking situations, and often spontaneous speaking situations, answering questions, giving feedback in the moment, fixing mistakes that we've made. Those are high stakes, and we feel very nervous and anxious. And there's some things that we can do to manage that anxiety. Happy to share some of those. But also we look at our speaking in spontaneous situations in a way that makes it harder for ourselves, in two ways at least. One, we want to do it right. And that pressure we put on ourselves to do it right actually makes it harder to do it at all. And then we also see these situations as threats and challenges. And if we can reframe them as opportunities, as giving us the ability to connect and collaborate rather than to have to defend our position or our well-being, it can fundamentally change how we approach it. So if we manage anxiety, if we let go of trying to do it right, and we take the time to see these things as opportunities, we can do better in all spontaneous speaking situations.
Is that what you meant by mindset, by just focusing on these three things?
There are a lot of things that we can adopt that will help us. So, for example, anybody who has ever heard of the world of improvisation has heard of this notion of yes and. Yes and is a really powerful way for approaching communication. It's a way of reframing the circumstances of a threat or a challenge. So when someone asks me a question, instead of saying, oh no, I have to defend this, I have to find the right answer, if we say, hey, this person is actually trying to give me an offer and an opportunity to extend and expand what I've said, and we look at it that way, that will help us feel much more comfortable in speaking. Similarly, in the world of sport, people are taught that rather than ruminate and fixate on what has just happened, you should be focused on what's coming next. There's this notion of next play. Next play is so powerful. Many of us, when we play a sport and we do poorly, we ruminate, we feel badly for our team, for ourselves. Similarly, if we do something great and it's really helpful in our sport, we can be really proud of ourselves and be sitting there reflecting and basking in that glory. All of that means that the game is still going on behind us and we're not part of it. The same thing happens in communication. If we make a mistake, if we don't answer a question well, and we ruminate on it, we miss an opportunity to connect and continue conversation going. And then finally, many of us look at mistakes as a bad thing. And a way I like to think about it is if you've ever seen how television and movies are produced, they actually take several takes. And I like to reframe mistakes as missed takes. If you're a movie director, you ask your actors to do several versions of the same shot in the same scene, not because anyone is bad or wrong. It's because you're looking for different subtleties, differences in ways of communicating the same idea. And that's the way we should approach our communication. If something doesn't go exactly the way we like it, that's okay. It was just a missed take. That's how we get better at what we do. So if we think about yes and, next play, and missed takes, we can have a much more positive and productive mindset for spontaneous speaking.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay. In your book, Think Faster, Talk Smarter, you say, and I quote, what most shapes how we communicate on the fly isn't something innate or deeply established in us, but rather how we approach this challenging task. Can you go deeper into that?
Yeah. So a lot of us, again, feel like we just aren't born with this skill, that this is something that passed us by. In fact, you can actively work on it. I like to say, if anybody's ever learned how to play a sport or a musical instrument, you have all the talent you need to learn to speak in the moment and speak spontaneously better. How do you get better at a sport and a musical instrument? Three
Practice.
things: repetition, reflection, and feedback. So you got to practice, as you said, repetition. You got to do it. You have to reflect. You have to take a moment to think what worked, what didn't work. There's that definition of insanity that says doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. That's how many of us think about our communication. We don't look at what worked and what didn't.
The
So we have to
reflection
reflect.
bit is hard, right? The reflection bit, because I know, watching a video of yourself speak or hearing, I mean, it's the most cringy thing you can think of, but I know it's
It's
important, but it's hard, isn't it? Or is it
It's
just me?
quite painful. It's quite painful, but there's a lot of value in it. We do lots
That's
of
true.
things that are painful that help us, right? If you're an
That's
athlete,
true.
you exercise and do reps.
Yeah.
And, we were talking about the younger generation. And for people of our vintage, and I'm older than you are, watching ourselves is a challenge. But with social media, younger folks are watching themselves, right? And
Yeah.
they go out of their way to present themselves well. So it's a slightly different feeling, I think. And then there's
Okay.
one more to this triumvirate, and that is feedback. You have to seek out feedback. That's where teachers, coaches, mentors, friends, coworkers, they can help give you feedback. If you're an athlete, you have a coach. If you're a musician, you typically have a teacher that helps. So repetition, reflection, and feedback are the way that we can all improve in our spontaneous communication.
So there's no short, easy ways. There's no magic pill. You got to work at it, right?
I wish there were. There is none that I've discovered, and I've been doing this work
Okay.
for decades. And if somebody finds it, I'd love to hear it.
Let's go back to anxiety. Anxiety is the main issue, isn't it, when it comes to communicating? Could you talk a little bit about managing anxiety? I know you say you can't get rid of it, but we can manage it. So can you talk a little bit about that?
That's exactly right. So, overcoming anxiety, I don't believe is possible. It's part of the human condition, but we can learn to manage it. And in fact, anxiety at some level actually helps us. It helps us focus, it gives us energy, it tells us what we're doing is important, but we want to manage it so it doesn't manage us. And when it comes to managing anxiety, we have to take a two-pronged approach. We have to deal both with symptoms and sources. Symptoms are what we feel physically or mentally. It's the perspiration, it's the rapid heart rate, it's the shakiness that many of us get. So when it comes to physical symptoms of anxiety, which is simply our body invoking the fight or flight response, we can do several things. One is take deep belly breaths, and the exhale is more important than the inhale. So you really want to have a prolonged exhale. So if you inhale to a 3 count, exhale to a 6 count. Doing that will slow down your heart rate. It'll slow down your rapid speaking. It will help you reduce disfluencies. That's the ums and uhs that happen. Similarly, if you are somebody who shakes a lot, doing purposeful movement that is not distracting helps. Adrenaline is what causes that shakiness. Adrenaline's purpose is to move you from threat to safety. So if you're in person with people and you get shaky, step in and welcome your audience. If you're virtual, you can lean in as you speak. All of this is a way of using purposeful movement to reduce that shakiness. We can manage anxiety by focusing on both symptoms and sources to make ourselves feel more relaxed.
That makes sense. You say story structure makes you a better and more effective speaker. How so? Can you take our listeners through at least a couple of story structure frameworks they can use?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. I love talking about structure. So let's start by saying that our brain is not very good at receiving information in lists. We've probably all struggled to remember lists of information. So when we speak, just giving a list isn't very helpful. In fact, it makes more work for the people listening to us. So instead of giving lists, we should package up our information in what I call a structure. Others call it frameworks. To me, a structure is nothing more than a logical connection of ideas, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Our brains are actually designed to take structure and story in. That's how we learn. And so if you can put your information in a structure, it not only helps your audience learn because that's what their brain is primed for, it also helps you focus and prioritize. There are many structures. One that many people are familiar with is problem, solution, benefit. If you've ever tried to convince anybody of anything, you've probably used problem, solution, benefit. You start by saying, here's what the issue or challenge is, here's the way to resolve it, and here's the benefits of doing so. So you start by articulating the problem, you then share the way you think you could resolve it, the solution, and then finally the benefit. If you have a structure that you're familiar with, that's appropriate for the situation, and you leverage it, it's likely to turn out well. Yeah, another analogy I like to use for structure is a roadmap. It's hard to get lost and it's hard to lose your audience if you have a roadmap. It tells you where to go and where to go next. So I'm not saying memorize. I don't believe memorizing is the way to get yourself through this anxiety. Rather, just know well your map and be able to adjust as you go.
That makes sense.
This podcast isn't meant to entertain you. It's meant to help you do life better by showing you how to think about and navigate important issues that aren't usually talked about to youngsters. But we believe that you need to hear this because it has the potential to change your life and the lives of other young people like you. So please share this episode with someone you care about, and if you haven't already, please hit the follow button. It helps us get these meaningful insights and messages in front of more youngsters.
You say the secret to effective communication are approach, attitude, and practice. I love that. Can you delve deeper into this? How does improving on these three aspects make a difference in driving impact?
So, approach again is realizing that you have control. This is something that you can work on. So, having that approach is really important, and understanding that you can build these skills. They might not come perfectly to you right away, but with persistence and practice, you
So is this similar
attitude.
to mindset? Is this similar to
Yeah,
having the right mindset?
yeah, absolutely. Approach and
Okay.
mindset are very similar, as is
Okay.
attitude. Attitude is, if you have tenacity, give yourself a little bit of grace to learn along the way. That can really, really help. So these are the ways that we get better at our communication. Is we have to work at it, we have to have the right approach, and we have to get the right feedback.
Chapter 6 of your book is about focus, right? This is where you talk about streamlining your ideas so they're focused and compelling. Could you elaborate?
Sure thing. So, one of the challenges we have in any communication, but especially spontaneous communication, is we aren't as concise as we could be. In spontaneous situations, we often take people on the journey of our figuring out what to say as we're saying it, right? I'm thinking about my answer to my question. I'm thinking about the feedback and I'm talking it through as I get there, which means we're saying more than we need to. We need to be more clear and concise. In our world today, I believe the most precious commodity we have is attention. We need to get people's attention and sustain that attention. And one way we do that is by being clear and concise. If I understand what's of value to you, then I can craft messages that relate to that value. Similarly, I have to know what my goal is. What am I trying to achieve in my communication? And the more specific your goal, the more specific your content can be. It helps you prioritize. So we have to put a premium on being precise and concise. And we have to do a little legwork and homework to understand what's important to our audience and what's important to us in terms of our goal.
I want to talk about job interviews next. Job
Mhm.
interviews can be nerve wracking at the best of times, and much more so when you're just starting your career. Now, many of our listeners are about to enter the workforce. What advice can you give them about facing interviews effectively?
I have so much to say about interviews, as I have about everything you've asked. So,
Okay.
first, when you get a job interview, that's very exciting, and it can also be very nerve wracking. So, a lot of research can help. Learn about the company, learn about the role. You can ask people, you can do some investigation online, you can use generative AI to help. So, once you've understood the company and what's important to them and what's important for the role, I would love for you to catalog specific skills that you have that line up with the requirements of the job. And by catalog, I literally mean list them out. So you might list out that you're very detail oriented or that you have the technical skills required for the job. Then give specific details and examples, list these as well, that support those skills that you have. And there are three types of support I'd like you to give to each of these attributes that you come with. One are stories. Be able to tell stories about how detail oriented you are. Second, give data. So you might say that when you were reviewing the books or the financials of a particular company, you were able to do that in half the time of some of your colleagues. That's a data point. And then finally, a third party testimonial. This could be a previous boss saying, wow, you're one of the most detailed employees we've ever had, or maybe you've won some kind of accolade or award. Once you understand the requirements of the job and the specific company, then look to itemize skills that you have that line up with the job. And then for each of those, find support, stories you can tell, data you can
Data?
give, and
Okay.
testimonials. Perfect. And then in the moment when you get a question, it becomes an act of assembly rather than origination. You just have all these ideas stockpiled, so you just pull them together. Now, how do you pull them together? By using a structure. I'm a huge fan of structuring answers. A good answer to me answers the question, gives an example, and those are the things you've stockpiled, and
Yeah.
then finally explains how that information you've just shared will help the potential employer.
What's something that really distinguishes you from other teachers with regard to teaching? Because I think, when it comes to students, they don't like a particular subject. I think they like the teacher. So how do you play on that?
One of the things I pride myself on is making the content I teach very relevant and readily accessible to students. So, what this means is the students I teach learn not only the skills, but they
But
learn
they
how to apply them and see the immediate benefit. Now, let's diagnose my answer. I answered the question, I gave an example, and I explained the relevance. So that's the structure that I like. So we start by doing research on the company and job. We stockpile the skills that we bring to the table as well as support for it. And then in the moment of interviewing, we answer the questions using the structure of answer, example, relevance. And that's how you do well in job interviews.
Okay. I'd like you to talk next about something that's relevant to all of us, right? Apologizing. Please, can you take us through how we can do this right?
So again, I think a structure can really help us. When
Okay.
you make an offense that deserves an apology, and you have to decide if your offense is one that requires an apology, when you do that, a few things before I give the structure. One, make sure it's as timely as possible. Apologizing for something you did days and weeks ago is not the same as in the moment, if you can. Now, there are times where apologizing in the moment might actually make the situation worse. So you might want to delay a little bit. Second, you want to make sure that your apology is for what you did, not how you made someone feel. So when we apologize, we first have to name the offense. We have to share what is it that we did. And then the final step is to make amends. So you would say, in the future, not only will I listen more thoroughly to what you say, but I will work to paraphrase your contribution before I add mine. So I acknowledge specifically what I did or perhaps did not do. I then explain or show that I appreciate the impact that it might have had on you. And then finally, I specifically define what I will do differently in the future to avoid this happening. That to me is a thorough and complete apology.
That's a lovely apology. I know many youngsters struggle with making conversation with people they've just met, right? Any pointers you can give our young audience on engaging in conversations like these?
Yes, I have a lot to say about small talk. First, many of us get very nervous in chit chat, small talk situations.
Yeah.
Yet, small talk and chit chat has so many opportunities for us. It's an opportunity to connect with people, to learn from people, to learn about ourselves. The most problems we have with small talk and chit chat is starting and ending it, right? So, I suggest that whenever we want to start, let's make it really simple on ourselves. Let's just acknowledge something that's going on in the environment, asking questions. People like to talk about themselves. So if you can get people talking about themselves, super easy way to initiate. Your goal in small talk is to set your partner or partners up for easy conversation. We go into these things thinking, I have to say the right thing to make people think I'm exciting and interesting, when in fact, all you have to do is help them have a conversation. I interviewed somebody on my podcast, Think Fast, Talk Smart. Her name is Rachel Greenwald, and she's a fascinating person. And she shared something with me that I think everybody should have as their goal for chit chat and small talk. And her advice was this: be interested, not interesting. The more interested you are, the more likely the conversation will continue, rather than trying to be the most interesting person in the room. And
That's
that's
so
what
true.
helps make small talk go. So how do you end it? People are like, I don't know how to stop. So what we often do
Yeah.
is we just refer to our biology. Oh, I'm hungry. I'm going to go get food. Or, oh, I have to
Oh,
go to the bathroom, right? There are better ways to end. And Rachel Greenwald, again, gave me a great tip. Signal that, share with it people that you want to leave. So you might say, oh, there's some people over there I'd like to go talk with. But before I go, I have one more question for you. So you don't just end it. You actually signal that you're going to end. You continue the conversation just a little bit more. And then when you're done, you say, thank you so much for that answer. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I'm now going to go talk with those folks over there. So you end with gratitude and then you walk away. I think it makes it light. It makes that whole situation easier.
that is such a good tip because I'm terrible at small talk. I'm going to use them. What techniques do you suggest that these youngsters use to de-escalate volatile situations? I know you have references in your book, and I'd really like you to speak about that.
Yeah, so situations can turn negative very quickly. And what's really important, I think, is to demonstrate understanding. So when you're in these circumstances, you have to demonstrate that you understand the other person's perspective, which means you have to listen. When we are in a conflict situation or a disagreement situation, we definitely want to make sure our position is understood. And we spend a lot of time explaining it with the notion that if you were understood my point of view, you'd agree with me. But that's not always the case. We can fully understand somebody and still disagree. We can leverage paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is where we reveal that we've heard them and we've heard what they say and give them an opportunity to correct if we get it wrong. Those are the ways that we can de-escalate and demonstrate that we understand. Now, to my mind, conflict is really about problem solving. It's not through being assertive. It's through listening and trying to find ways to collaborate and solve the problem.
Yeah. And sometimes, even if you just remind yourself to listen, I think that can just make a huge difference because sometimes we forget to listen.
Certainly, absolutely, especially when we think we're right.
Yeah. Okay. Is there a way to deliver bad news more gracefully?
I'm sure there is. No, certainly. Again, this is all about empathy and understanding the other person's perspective. So when I
Okay.
have some news to give that is not great, maybe it's constructive feedback, maybe it's that the goal we were trying to achieve didn't take place, we first and foremost need to appreciate where the other person is emotionally and mentally. And then think about ways of packaging the information to be direct, to be clear, but also to be kind, or by asking questions of the situation or asking the other person to share their thoughts first. So you can buy yourself time, even in spontaneous situations where you have bad news to give.
So empathy plays a big role as well when you're giving back
Oh,
news, right?
absolutely. Understanding the other's perspective is critical.
What message do you have for our listeners?
I have lots of messages, but let me distill them down. First, communication is critical to success in business and in life, and you should take the time to work on communication. Seek out others who can help. Watch and observe others that you deem to be good communicators. What are they doing? What could you take from them without copying them that works? So it's about observing and it's about working on it and practicing it. And seek out information, podcasts like this one that you're listening to, podcasts like mine, find books, find teachers. There are ways to learn to get better, and everybody can improve. Never let anybody tell you that you cannot communicate well. You can. You might have to work at it, but you certainly can get better.
That is such a wonderful message. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for your time today and for all the advice and tactics you so generously shared with our audience. I really hope we can welcome you back on our podcast soon again.
It was a true pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for the thoughtful and insightful questions.
Thank you for listening. I want to help you use what you learned here. And the best way to do that is to get a podcast buddy. That's someone who also listens to this podcast. Then talk to your podcast buddy about the one takeaway from this episode that resonated with you the most. That's it. That's all you have to do. Remember that much of what is talked about on this podcast is stuff that's not typically talked about to young people, and it should be. It's stuff that you need to know so that you can lead a life that's, you guessed it, smarter, richer, and braver. This is your host, Marilyn Pinto, signing off. Until next time.
If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to broach in our upcoming episodes, please email us at smarterricherbraver@gmail.com. And if you'd like to sign up for one of our award-winning programs, go to kfi.global and check out our upcoming schedule.